the cacophony of the Lisbon gallery was a symphony of pretension, a carefully curated chaos of clinking wine glasses, air kisses, and the low, self-satisfied murmur of people discussing art they barely understood. For Isabela Santos, the noise was a welcome shield. She stood before a sprawling canvas, a splash of violent crimson and deep ocean blue that should have captivated her, a fellow artist. But her eyes weren't seeing the paint, they were scanning the reflection in the protective glass, her heart a frantic bird beating against the cage of her ribs. He was here. Marco. Her ex-husband, a wolf in a bespoke suit, had found her. Again. It had been 6 months since the divorce was finalized, 6 months of looking over her shoulder, of changing her phone number, of jumping at shadows. He wasn't violent in the way one might expect, no, his cruelty was a subtler poison. A whispered threat about her aging parents' small vineyard in the Douro Valley. A friendly suggestion that no one would ever show her hobbyist pottery if he had anything to say about it. He was a master of psychological siege warfare, and tonight, he was breaching her walls. She saw him in the reflection, his gaze a physical weight across the room, pinning her in place. He began to move, a shark cutting smoothly through the water, a polite, predatory smile already forming on his lips. Panic, cold and absolute, flooded her veins. The elegant room suddenly felt like a prison. The exits were too far, the crowd too thick. Her breath hitched, her vision tunneling. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. It was pure, animal instinct that took over. She spun away from the painting, her movements jerky, and her hand shot out, blindly grasping for an anchor in the storm. Her fingers closed around a stranger's hand. It was large, startlingly so, and cool to the touch. The skin was rough with calluses, a map of hard labor or perhaps something else entirely. She looked up, her plea already a desperate whisper on her lips. Por favor, finge que me conhece. Por favor. The words were a fragile thread, her last hope. The man she had grabbed was unlike anyone in the room. While the other men were soft in their tailored linens and silks, he was carved from granite and shadow. He stood a full head taller than her, his posture not just straight but immovable, a pillar of quiet authority in the shifting sea of people. He wore a simple, exquisitely cut black suit that screamed of a different kind of wealth, one that wasn't advertised but was deeply, terrifyingly inherent. His hair was a dark, unruly wave, and his face was all sharp angles and severe lines, a masterpiece of stark beauty and implicit threat. He looked down at her, his eyes the color of a winter storm over the Atlantic, and they held no warmth, no surprise, only a chilling, analytical stillness. The air around them seemed to freeze. She could feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere as two other large men, who had been standing a discreet distance away, now closed ranks, their attention laser-focused on her. She had just stumbled into the lion's den. For a heart-stopping second, she thought he would shake her off, call security, expose her humiliating plight to the entire room. But then, his fingers closed around hers. His grip wasn't gentle, it was absolute, a firm, unyielding pressure that felt less like a comfort and more like a claim. He brought her captured hand slightly towards his body, tucking it against the hard plane of his chest, a strangely intimate gesture that felt both protective and possessive. He didn't even glance at the approaching Marco. His gaze remained locked on her, and when he spoke, his voice was a low, resonant rumble that vibrated through her very bones, a sound so devoid of frivolity it silenced the cacophony in her head. "There you are, Milaya *", he said, the foreign endearment sounding like both a caress and a command. "I was looking for you." Marco arrived then, his charming mask slightly cracked with confusion and burgeoning anger. "Isabela? What is this? Who is this man?" he demanded, his Portuguese sharp. The stranger, Aleksandr Volkov, finally turned his head. He didn't need to raise his voice. The sheer force of his attention was a physical blow. He regarded Marco not as a rival, not as a threat, but as a piece of lint on his immaculate sleeve. He said nothing, simply stared, his grey eyes flat and dead. One of his companions, a man with a scar bisecting his eyebrow, took a half-step forward and uttered a single, guttural phrase in Russian. The meaning was universal, transcending language, *leave. Now. Marco, a man used to getting his way through wealth and social maneuvering, was utterly disarmed. He faltered, his face flushing with a mixture of fury and primal fear. He looked at Isabela, at the stranger's hand still firmly encasing hers, and something in his expression shifted from possession to bitter, impotent rage. With a final, venomous glare, he turned on his heel and melted back into the crowd. The immediate danger had passed, but a new, more profound terror was taking root in Isabela's soul. The man, Aleksandr, did not release her hand. Instead, he began to walk, pulling her with him, his body a shield between her and the world she knew. He didn't speak as he led her out of the gallery, his two shadows clearing a path through the throng. The warm Lisbon night air hit her face, but it brought no relief. He guided her not toward the bustling street, but toward a waiting, silent black sedan, its windows tinted to an opaque darkness. "Thank you," she stammered, finally finding her voice, trying to gently pull her hand away. I can't thank you enough. I'll be going now." His grip tightened infinitesimally, not enough to hurt, but enough to shatter any illusion of choice. He opened the car door, the interior a plush, leather-lined cavern. He looked down at her, his stormy eyes sweeping over her face, taking in the fear, the gratitude, the lingering panic. "No," he said, the single word final and absolute. "You will come with me. We need to talk about the mess you have just handed me, *Milaya star." The door closed behind her, sealing her in the quiet, expensive darkness with a man who was infinitely more dangerous than the one she had just escaped. The car pulled away from the curb, taking her from the familiar lights of her city into the unknown, her fate now irrevocably tied to the hand she had grabbed in a moment of blind desperation. The silence inside the sedan was a living entity, thick and heavy, absorbing the distant sounds of Lisbon's nightlife like a tomb. It was a stark contrast to the frantic beat of Isabela's heart, which hammered against her ribs like a trapped thing. The man, Aleksandr, did not look at her. He sat beside her, a statue of contained power, his gaze fixed on the city lights sliding past the impenetrable tint of his window. His profile was sharp, unforgiving, a silhouette carved from the very darkness they moved through. The two other men were in the front, the one with the scar occasionally glancing in the rearview mirror, his eyes not on the road, but on her. She clutched the strap of her small purse, her knuckles white. The cool, calloused feel of his hand was still imprinted on her skin, a phantom brand. "Where are you taking me?" she finally managed, her voice a fragile thread in the oppressive quiet. He didn't turn. "Somewhere we can talk." His voice was flat, devoid of the deceptive warmth he'd used in the gallery. This was his true tone, the one that lay beneath the surface, cold, factual, and utterly unyielding. "Talk? I told you, I'm fine now. He's gone. You can let me out at the next corner. I live near the Alfama district." It was a lie. She lived in the opposite direction, in a small, sun-drenched apartment in Graca, but the instinct to misdirect, to protect her sanctuary, was as automatic as breathing. This time, he turned his head. The movement was slow, deliberate. The ambient light from passing street lamps sliced through the dark interior, catching the icy gray of his eyes. They weren't just cold, they were ancient, holding a weight of knowledge and violence that made her blood run cold. "You think this is about your location?" he asked, the question a soft, dangerous thing. "You involved me in a problem. My problem now. We will discuss the nature of that problem, and its solution." She shrank back against the plush leather. "I didn't involve you. I needed a moment. You took my hand." He stated it as a fundamental, world-altering fact. "In my world, that is not a small thing. It is a claim. A declaration." "That man, your husband?" He paused, letting the word hang in the air, and she gave a tiny, involuntary nod. "He saw it. He will not forget it. And now, I must decide what to do with the consequence of your claim." The car glided to a halt not outside an office or a restaurant, but before a severe, modern building overlooking the Tagus River. It was the kind of place that didn't have a visible doorbell or name, just a seamless facade of dark glass and steel. One of the men from the front, the one without the scar, exited and opened her door before she could even reach for the handle. The message was clear: she was not a guest with agency, she was a package being delivered. The elevator was a silent, brass-paneled box that ascended without a sound, without even the faint sensation of movement. It opened directly into a penthouse. Isabela stepped out and stopped dead, her breath catching. The entire far wall was a single pane of glass, framing a breathtaking, panoramic view of the 25 de Abril Bridge, its lights glittering like a necklace across the dark water, and the Cristo Rey statue standing sentinel on the far bank. It was a view she had painted a dozen times, a view that sang of her home. But here, in this space, it felt alien. The apartment itself was a study in minimalistic severity. Polished concrete floors, a single, long black leather sofa, a monolithic slab of obsidian that served as a coffee table. There were no personal touches, no photographs, no art on the walls except for a single, large, abstract piece that was little more than a slash of black and silver. It was less a home and more a lair. A fortress. Aleksandr walked to a bar cart made of the same dark metal as the building's exterior and poured a single measure of a viscous, amber liquid into a heavy crystal tumbler. He did not offer her one. "Sit," he said, gesturing with his glass toward the sofa. She remained standing, a flicker of her old defiance igniting. "I would prefer to stand. And I would prefer to know what you want from me." A ghost of something, not a smile, but a flicker of assessment, crossed his features. He took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving her. "What I want is information." "Your name?" "Isabela. Isabela Santos." "Your business with that man?" "Marco. He is my ex-husband. He is possessive. He couldn't accept that I left him. He finds me. He makes threats. Tonight, I panicked." She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling exposed under his unblinking gaze. "Threats of what nature?" He implies things. About my family. My career. He uses what he knows about me to get inside my head." She hated the tremor in her voice, the way she sounded like a frightened child. Aleksandr listened, his expression unchanging. He placed his empty glass on the obsidian table with a soft, definitive click. "So. A small man with a bruised ego. A pest." He said the word with utter contempt. "But a pest who has now seen you with me. That complicates things." "How?" she asked, frustration and fear mingling in her chest. "He's gone. You scared him away. It's over." "It is not over," he stated, his voice dropping, taking on a new, more terrifying intensity. He took a step toward her, and she instinctively took a step back, her calves hitting the edge of the low sofa. "He will look into me. He will find nothing, or he will find things he does not understand. This will make him either more cautious or more reckless. Both are inconvenient. You have drawn a line from your mess to my door, Isabela Santos. And I do not allow loose ends." The finality in his tone was absolute. This was not a negotiation. It was a verdict. She was a loose end. The true horror of her situation crashed down upon her. She had fled a gilded cage only to throw herself into the den of a predator she could not even begin to comprehend. The view of her beloved city from this terrible, beautiful room was a cruel joke. She was surrounded by Lisbon, but she had never been further. The word inconvenient hung in the sterile air of the penthouse, a deceptively mild term for the tectonic shift that had just occurred in Isabela's life. Loose end. She was a loose end to be managed, a problem to be solved. The sheer, dehumanizing finality of it stole the air from her lungs more effectively than any of Marco's manipulative tirades ever had. He had at least seen her as a possession, a thing to be owned. This man, Aleksandr, looked at her as if she were a mathematical equation that had produced an undesirable result. "I am not a loose end," she whispered, the words sounding frail and foolish even to her own ears. "I am a person. I will go home, and I will never speak of you, of this. You have my word." Alexander let out a sound that was not quite a laugh, a short, harsh exhalation that held no humor. "Your word," he repeated, as if tasting a foreign and unpalatable spice. "Your word is a currency I do not accept." He walked past her, his proximity making the fine hairs on her arm stand up, and picked up a sleek, black remote. With a soft click, metal shutters began to descend silently over the magnificent glass wall, segment by segment, systematically blotting out the view of the bridge, the river, the city, until the room was sealed in a windowless, artificial twilight. The message was unmistakable: her world, the one she knew and loved, was being shut out. She was now entirely in his. "You will stay here," he stated, his back still to her as he surveyed the now barren wall. "For your safety, and for mine." He finally turned, his form a dark silhouette against the grey metal. "My man, Dimitri," he gestured with his chin toward the scarred man who had taken up a post by the elevator door, "will remain. You will not leave. You will not use a phone. You will not attempt to contact anyone. Is that understood?" Panic, cold and sharp, lanced through her. "You can't keep me here. This is kidnapping." "It is containment," he corrected, his voice chillingly calm. "A quarantine until I can assess the level of infection your pest represents. The accommodations are comfortable. Do not test my generosity by making them otherwise." He moved toward a hallway that led deeper into the penthouse, presumably to bedrooms, and opened a door. "This will be your room. There is a bathroom. Everything you need is inside." She didn't move, her feet rooted to the polished concrete floor, a statue of defiance and despair. "I need my clay. My tools. My life." For a fleeting moment, something flickered in his stormy eyes. Not sympathy, but a spark of analytical curiosity. "You are an artist." "It is what I am," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength from the mention of her craft. "It is not a hobby. It is everything." He considered this for a long moment, his gaze sweeping over her once more, as if seeing a new, slightly more complex variable. "What do you work with?" "Clay, mostly. Porcelain. I have a wheel, kilns at my studio." The words felt absurdly normal, a fragment of her real life spoken into this surreal nightmare. He gave a short, sharp nod, a decision made. "I will have your things brought here. A wheel. Clay. Whatever you require. You may work in the main room during the day." It was not a kindness, she realized. It was a warden providing a distraction for a prisoner, a way to keep the captive quiet and occupied. He was curating her cage, making it more palatable, but a cage it remained. Before she could respond, he was gone, the door to what she assumed was his own room closing with a soft, definitive thud that echoed in the vast, silent space. She was alone, save for the imposing, silent presence of Dimitri by the elevator. She stood there for a long time, staring at the shuttered wall, listening to the profound silence of a place that, despite its luxury, felt deader than stone. Slowly, mechanically, she walked into the room he had indicated. It was as stark and impersonal as the living area, a large bed with crisp white linens, a single chair, a built-in wardrobe empty save for a few wooden hangers. There were no windows. It was a beautifully appointed cell. She sat on the edge of the bed, the firm mattress offering no comfort. The events of the evening replayed in her mind on a frantic loop: the gallery, Marco's face, the desperate grab for a stranger's hand, the cold grip that had ensnared her, the silent car ride, this tomb. Tears threatened, hot and sharp, but she forced them back. Crying was a luxury she could not afford in the presence of men like this. Men who saw emotion as a weakness to be exploited. She was a prisoner, yes, but she was also Isabela Santos, who had fought her way out of one prison already. She would not break so easily. She lay back on the bed, staring at the blank ceiling, and began to plan. She would observe. She would learn his routines, the guard's patterns. She would look for a weakness, a crack in the impeccable, terrifying facade of Aleksandr Volkov. The shutters had closed on her old life, but the fight for a new one, for any kind of life at all, had just begun in the oppressive quiet of her beautiful, gilded cage. The morning arrived not with the gentle, golden light of Lisbon seeping through her shutters, but with the silent, pervasive glow of recessed lighting in the ceiling, triggered by some unseen timer or command. Isabela had slept fitfully, her dreams a chaotic montage of Marco's sneering face and Aleksandr's impassive grey eyes. Waking in the windowless room was a disorienting shock, a severance from the natural rhythm of day and night that left her feeling unmoored. For a long moment, she simply lay there, listening to the profound silence, broken only by the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the penthouse's climate control. It was the sound of absolute isolation. Pushing herself up, she found a simple, expensive-looking tracksuit and toiletries laid out on the chair. The efficiency of it, the cold foresight, was another reminder of her status as a managed asset. After a shower in the sleek, marble-lined bathroom, she emerged from her room feeling no cleaner, no more refreshed, only more acutely aware of the sterile environment. The metal shutters were still down, sealing the world away. Dimitri was in the main living area, standing in the exact same position by the elevator. He nodded once, a curt, professional acknowledgement, his scarred face giving nothing away. On the monolithic obsidian coffee table, a breakfast spread had been laid out. Fresh bread, ripe fruit, strong coffee, a selection of cheeses. It was a perfect, picturesque meal that felt utterly divorced from any human touch. She ate alone, the clink of her knife on the porcelain plate absurdly loud in the cavernous space. She was just finishing her coffee when the elevator chimed, a soft, dissonant note in the quiet. Her heart leaped into her throat. Aleksandr emerged, followed by two other men carrying large, familiar cardboard boxes. Her boxes. From her studio. They placed them carefully in the center of the room, next to a newly installed, compact electric pottery wheel and a small table, before retreating back into the elevator without a word. Aleksandr looked as he had the night before, immaculate in a dark, tailored suit, his expression one of detached command. He hadn't slept, or if he had, it had left no mark on him. He watched as Isabela rushed to the boxes, her hands trembling as she tore them open. Inside, nestled in packing material, were her tools. Her favorite ribs and loop tools, her sponges, her bags of precious porcelain clay, even the half-finished, bone-dry vase she had been working on before going to the gallery. A sob caught in her throat, a confusing mix of gratitude and profound violation. He had been inside her sanctuary, his men had touched her things, had seen the intimate chaos of her creative space. She looked up at him, her eyes wide. "You went to my studio." "I had it retrieved," he corrected, his tone implying a significant difference. "It is as you left it." But it wasn't. Nothing was. Her tools in this sterile environment were like surgical instruments in a butcher's shop, out of place and mocking. Yet, the sight of them, the familiar feel of the wooden handle of her favorite rib, was a lifeline. It was a piece of her soul in this soulless place. "Thank you," she said, the words tasting foreign. He didn't acknowledge her gratitude. His eyes were on her hands, on the way her fingers curled protectively around the tool. "You will work here. It will give you purpose. It will keep you occupied." He stated it as a simple, operational fact. "Dimitri will be your shadow. Do not attempt to speak to him of anything beyond your immediate needs." And with that, he was gone again, the elevator swallowing him whole, leaving her alone with her silent guard and the ghost of her old life contained in cardboard boxes. For a long time, she simply sat on the floor, surrounded by her things, feeling paralyzed. The urge to create, usually a compulsion as natural as breathing, felt stifled under the unblinking eye of Dimitri and the oppressive weight of the shuttered room. How could she throw a pot, an act that required vulnerability and a surrender to the moment, under such conditions? It felt like being asked to undress in public. But as the hours bled into one another, marked only by the silent appearance of lunch, a stubborn defiance began to kindle within her. This was her territory, the one place where she had always been in control. The clay was her language. If this was to be her prison, she would not let them take this from her too. With a resolve that felt both fragile and fierce, she stood. She set up the wheel on the sheet they had laid down, filled a bucket with water from the bar sink, and pulled out a lump of the cool, grey porcelain. She wedged it on the table, the rhythmic, physical thumping a primal drumbeat in the quiet. It was a sound that belonged to her, not to him. She sat at the wheel, kicked it on, and centered the clay with a focus that shut out Dimitri, shut out the shutters, shut out everything but the spinning mound of earth beneath her hands. The world narrowed to the pressure of her palms, the cool slip of the water, the rising form emerging from the formless mass. She was creating shape from chaos, order from entropy. It was an act of rebellion. She didn't know how long she worked, losing herself in the hypnotic rhythm, but when she finally looked up, her hands caked in drying clay, a tall, dark figure was standing at the edge of the living area, watching her. Aleksandr had returned. He had changed into dark trousers and a simple black sweater, and he stood utterly still, his arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't looking at her, but at the vase taking shape on the wheel. He had been there for she didn't know how long, his presence a cold spot in the room she had almost managed to forget. His expression was, as always, unreadable, but his gaze was fixed on the spinning clay with an intensity that was different from his usual analytical assessment. It was the look of a man who dealt only in destruction, witnessing the mysterious, alien process of creation. He did not speak, did not move, simply observed, and in that silent observation, Isabela felt a new, different kind of fear, not the fear of a threat, but the fear of being truly, deeply seen by a man who should have been blind to such things. The world had shrunk to the spinning wheel and the cool, yielding reality of the clay. For a timeless span, Isabela had forgotten the shutters, the guard, the gilded cage. There was only the centrifugal force, the pressure of her hands, the slow, miraculous ascent of form from a shapeless lump. It was a meditation, a spell she wove to keep the terror at bay. The vase was taking shape, its walls rising thin and even, a bell-shaped curve that spoke of quiet grace, a stark contrast to the brutalist severity of its prison. And then, a shift in the air, a presence as palpable as a drop in barometric pressure before a storm. Her hands faltered for a second, causing a slight wobble in the form, which she quickly corrected, her heart hammering anew. She didn't need to look up to know he was there. Aleksandr stood at the periphery of the living area, having emerged from the depths of the penthouse as silently as a shadow. He had shed his suit jacket, the dark sweater making him seem both more approachable and more intrinsically dangerous, the fabric emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders. His arms were crossed, his posture not one of casual observation, but of intense, focused study. He wasn't looking at her, not at her face, her disheveled hair, or her clay-stained clothes. His entire attention was consumed by the spinning wheel, by the wet, grey cylinder transforming under her guidance. The storm in his eyes had quieted to a deep, unnerving stillness. This was a man whose world was built on transactions of power and violence, on breaking and taking, and he was now witnessing the fundamental opposite, an act of nurturing, of giving form, of pure creation. It was an alien language, and he seemed to be trying to decipher its grammar. Isabela's hands continued their work, smoothing the lip of the vase, but her awareness was now split. Every nerve ending was tuned to his silent presence. She felt exposed, more than she had when he'd interrogated her, more than when he'd declared her a loose end. This felt like he was seeing past her fear, past her defiance, straight into the core of who she was. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the soft whir of the wheel and the slick sound of her hands on clay. He did not speak, did not move, and the sheer intensity of his silent observation was a weight she could feel on her skin. Finally, with a slow, deliberate movement that broke the spell, he uncrossed his arms and took a single step closer. He didn't come near enough to touch, but his proximity made the space around the wheel feel suddenly claustrophobic. "How do you know when it is finished?" His voice was low, the Russian accent wrapping around the English words, making the simple question sound like a profound inquiry. The question startled her. It was so far from anything she had expected him to say. She kept her eyes on the vase, using it as an anchor. "You don't always know with your head," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "You feel it. In your hands. The clay tells you when it has found its shape. When to stop pushing, or you risk collapsing it all." She risked a glance at him. His gaze had shifted from the clay to her hands, watching the way her fingers, skilled and sure, caressed the form into being. He was silent again, absorbing this. The concept was likely anathema to him. He was a man who decided when things were finished, with a command, a bullet, a signed contract. He did not listen, he dictated. "It is fragile," he stated, not as a criticism, but as a discovery. "Everything that is beautiful often is," she replied, a new, strange courage unfurling inside her. This was her domain. Here, on this wheel, she was the authority. The fragility is part of its truth. To make it strong, you have to honor its delicate nature. You can't force it. You have to guide it. His eyes lifted from her hands to meet hers. The intensity in them was no longer just analytical. It was something darker, more possessive, more fascinated. He saw the parallel she had not explicitly drawn. He saw her, Isabela, the fragile, beautiful thing he had taken, and he was, for the first time, considering that force might not be the way to keep her from collapsing. He looked from her eyes, down to the elegant curve of the vase, and back again. In that moment, she was no longer just a problem to be solved. The artifact and the artist had become inextricably linked in his mind, a single, complex puzzle of vulnerability and strength that his brutal calculus could not solve. He took a final, long look at the spinning vase, then at her clay-streaked, defiant face, and without another word, he turned and walked away, retreating back into the shadows of the hallway. The encounter was over, but the atmosphere in the room had been fundamentally altered. The balance of power had not shifted, not yet, but a crack had appeared in his armor of absolute control. He had asked a question not about threats or consequences, but about art. And she had given him an answer that was also a warning. The wheel slowed to a stop. The vase was finished, for now. Its fate, like her own, was suspended, waiting for the kill's fire. But in the lingering, charged silence, one thing was certain: the story of the Portuguese artist and the Slavic king was far from over. Their dangerous dance had only just begun, and the next steps would decide if they would break each other, or forge something entirely new from the fire. Want to be the first to get more high-tension mafia romance stories like this? Subscribe to Love and Loaded Guns to get more exciting romance books just at the reach of your fingertips.